I'm going to show you how you can make some mouldings using a router and some commonly used profile cutters. Stay tuned and check it out. There are literally thousands of router profile cutters out there on the market that you can use to make your own mouldings. Whether it's to give the edge of a board a nice detail or to produce a moulding that you can use by either combining it with another moulding or use on its own. I've got some profile cutters here that I like to use, and these are from Routerbitmall.com. If you head on over to their website, you'll find a massive selection of cutters, all at a really good price, and there's also an extra 8% off if you use code Justin at checkout. Details in the description below. You'll notice that 4 of these cutters have bearings on, which allow you to use a hand router and therefore run the cutter along the edge of a board. This cutter, however, does not have a bearing, so we're going to use this one on the router table. There is a way you can use this on a hand router, and I'm going to show you that later on. I've got some pieces of 20mm thick softwood that I'm using to create the mouldings. So let's get on with it. I'm going to start with these 3 cutters here. They do look similar to each other, but they've just got a few subtle differences. Now, the key thing to using these type of profile cutters is that when you set them in the router, you need to set them at their finished depth. Because of their often complex profile, if you were to adjust the depth and remachine your board, you will end up with something you weren't expecting. But what you can do with these cutters is have them set at different depths to give you slightly different profiles. You'll notice the radius on this top part of all these 3 cutters. This means you can adjust the cutter so the face of your moulding has a smooth round over edge to it. Sink the cutter down a little and you'll end up with a lip created by this bit here, then followed by a round over, which gives quite a different look. So let's begin with this single radius bit, which will produce a convex radius on your board. I'll adjust the cutter in the router to produce one moulding with a lip on this edge of the board, and then without the lip on this edge of the board. You can see the difference between the 2 profiles. So this side on the left is where we went a little bit deeper and we got the lip on top, and then on this side we raised the cutter a bit and we've just got the round over. Next up, we've got this double radius bit which will produce a convex and concave radius on our piece of timber. And then once again, you can see on this side, we've got the double radius with a lip on top, and then this side a double radius, but just the top is rounded over. And then next we've got this double radius again, but this time we've got this little extra step on it just here. Very similar to the last cutter, but we've got an extra step in the middle. The next cutter we're using is this 45-degree chamfer bit, and with this cutter you can adjust the depth and remachine an edge. It's good practice to begin with a shallow cut and gradually increase the depth. And if you sink the cutter deeper, you'll end up with a slightly different profile with a vertical edge. On this side, I'll create a 45-degree chamfer, while on this side, I'll take this in 2 passes, go a bit deeper and create a slightly different profile. This cutter produces a very simple but effective profile to any kind of tabletop or moulding. Now we're having a go with this 18.25mm radius bullnose cutter. This particular profile is commonly used on staircase treads, but can be used with other profile cutters to produce larger mouldings. And because this cutter doesn't have a bearing on, I'm going to be using the router table. But don't fear, because I'm going to show you how you can use this cutter in your handheld router afterwards. So I've set the cutter up in the router and adjusted it so it's completely central to this piece of timber. Now that I've converted my router table fence, it means I can bring this section forward and just pack it out with these pieces of timber. And now that this section is further forward, I need to get this directly in line with the cutter here. With this part of the fence very slightly further forward, it means I'll be able to take a small amount off this front edge here, but then it should just smoothly glide along this part of the fence. So if you want to use your hand router and your profile cutter doesn't have a bearing, you need to use the guide that came with your router and set it up so the guide is in line with the narrowest part of the cutter. So that's looking pretty good, and it did dip down just at the end there, but it doesn't matter because if you're using this for a moulding, you're going to be cutting it down anyway. Now I've machined all of these profiles, 5 cutters altogether, adjusting them slightly. I've got 10 different profiles here. So what you can do at this point, you can either just rip those down on a table saw and use them individually, or you can start putting them together and making much bigger, fancier mouldings. For example, this one that I quite like, just putting 3 of the boards together, and if you add all those together, you get a rather fancy profile. But what you would need to do here is just chop these down to about this width, so you've got a straight edge right along the back of all of them, and glue these together, and you end up with a rather large, fancy moulding. And then something a little bit more simple, just 2 boards together here, and I think that would make a rather nice mantelpiece. If you've got any helpful tips or suggestions, I'd love to hear them, so leave those in the comments box. Happy woodworking, and I'll see you next time.